Dr. Akala Kamaat coming at you live today via YouTube live stream. And I do want to pull up um, YouTube to make sure that I'm doing this, that it's happening on the channel. So give me a second, okay? Oh, it is. All right. So, look, I'm so glad when technology works phenomenally. And, I know I come on when I want to come on, but, and it'd be better probably if I had a set time. But, love and lights, everybody. I welcome all to come into the space with me and explore these ideas that I've been given to share, right? As an intuitive psychic advisor, it's my profession, in addition to being a transformational or resonance mentor, because we all need to resonate in alignment with our higher mind itself, right? Um, so yes, called in here to share. It is a calling to share. So love and lights, you're welcome all. Come on in. I hope everybody's having a fantastic Wednesday. I refuse to say hump day, first of all, because of that dumb Camel commercial. But secondly, because why is it a hump day? We get so tied to time and the days of the week that we have all these ways of seeing these days that are so low vibrational. It's not hump day. It's a beautiful day. And what hump are we getting over? Perspective changing, right? Mindset shifts, right? Okay, I'm going to stop there because I don't want to get off into that. Today, I want to talk about the collective somatic and how our nervous system shapes social change and unity. And the reason why the download I'm getting about coming here and talking about this, or having these series of things like the collapse of social systems, bringing up the scarcity pain matrix, which is so tied to a lot of the stuff that we're experiencing right now in our society. But, my work is with the body and the emotions. I'm not a therapist licensed. I don't get into counseling approaches to help people address trauma, but in my work as a resonance mentor, people are hurting. And that hurt comes in the body, inside, nervous system. The hurt comes in the cognition, in the mind, shows in the behavior, in the way we talk. And these are all things that make sense in my work to address. And the scarcity pain matrix is the cage of fear. Yeah? And right now, the scarcity pain matrix is very important in regards to what we're experiencing now in our society, as well as the program of release, right? Because the whole idea behind the program of release is to recognize repetitive patterns. And that's not just in ourselves, in our life, but if we can extend this recognition out into the ecosystem in which we are implanted, it makes sense. And especially if you're coming from the position of quantum physics or quantum entanglement, our energy, we're just pure energy. Everything's energy, right? It has certain chemical reactions embedded in things that make it feel harder, softer, diffuse, things like that. But we are all energetically connected. And if we think about our biology, right? We have the molecules, we have the atoms that make up the molecules, and then we have the protons and neutrons popping around in there, and there's space at that level of energy, space, air, that picks up and is synergized, entangled with energy, everything, the buildings, the plants, the animals, the furniture. And some folks will be like, what is she talking about? Maybe I'll do a live stream on quantum entanglement in all of its dimensions. Okay, Edward Bruce Bynum talks about this connection He doesn't call it necessarily quantum entanglement, but he notes how our energies are embedded with one another, right? And I could get into the earth as a biological system and the membrane that cover. Look, we can go deep into this idea of entanglement, but where I want to sit on today is this collective understanding of the body. At the root, of course, is this idea of entangled energies. But my goal is sort of making clear on some level the relationship between our nervous systems and their role in shaping society and in cultivating unity, right? And so if there's something that I'm saying today that resonates with you, please leave a comment. And if you think somebody else needs to see this, please share and like. That would be fantastic. And subscribe is always important. The like is important for the algorithms, right? And so is subscribe. You know, everything's about these numbers. I'm looking at YouTube and what you get, you know, when you get opened up to monetize. And I mean, everything is just all about how many people can you collect? How many likes can you collect? It's all about hoarding things. And yes, we got to operate on some level. I'm not trying to hoard. I just want my message to have visibility. What I have to share and say. So comment if something hits and you want to let people know or share your understanding or how you're seeing this. Like and subscribe for the other reasons that I pointed out. Okay? So, today, like I said, I want to talk about the collective somatic, how the nervous system shapes social change and unity, okay? And as I sort of mentioned or touched upon briefly right here, that we are currently living through a silent epidemic of shared dysregulation, okay? That bridges the gap between survival, which I've talked about a lot on this channel, and systemic failure. Well, I've talked about the collapse of systems. I haven't yet shared the message of survival, systemic failure, and how dysregulation is situated in the middle of this, okay? And look, have you ever wondered why societies, or a society, our society, if you want to bring it home to us, I'm in America, feel stuck in the same toxic cycles? Despite our best efforts to change, seems like something always wants to take us back. Undo the evolution. And I'm not judging that good or bad. Just have you ever wondered? And the truth isn't in our politics. It's in our biology. Your body's flight or fight response is being mirrored by millions. And yes, we are living in flight or fight. Regardless of who you are, which side you land on, we're all ready for something right now. Because that is the climate in which we are situated in. And, you know, an epidemic is that we have been in this situation over and over again, all peoples, okay? And so this fight or flight response is being mirrored by millions, and that we are subconsciously syncing our trauma responses and thus creating a collective nervous system, a biological infrastructure that traps us in systemic stagnation instead of evolution. And this prevents any idea or movement to sustainable unity. And as I keep talking about self-sovereignty and being the author of ourselves and our lives, look, it's time to dismantle, as I've talked about in the last live stream, these rigid structures reimagine them and reclaim our collective evolution. We can rewrite the script of things that are happening here and now, and making sure that we are moving into a space that is not a rehashing of the old, but a reimagined to reclaim this collective evolution in which, and look, the evolution thing is real. I will talk about that. But, to reclaim our collective evolution. Maybe not everybody's evolving spiritually or psychically, but there was, let's say, a policy evolution, right? There was a inclusive evolution, flawed fundamentally, but it was beginning, okay? So along these lines, I want to talk about what I call architecture of collective trauma. I'm using that phrase very deliberately because trauma is often discussed as though it lives only in the memory of what happened. What's your trauma from childhood? You go to the psychologist, you got the trauma, you saw something. That's all in the past, right? You go and you talk about it. Or it's in the private lives, like I said, of the individuals, right? They don't come out and talk. They just deal without getting the support and help they need, but everybody has their reasons for that, okay? And so I'm not talking about it in reference and situating in psychology and in our private lives, because for this discussion, those areas are just too narrow, okay? Trauma also becomes structural, right? So a collective trauma that becomes structural. And that means it settles into habits, institutions, expectations, design choices, public policy, leadership culture, and social norms. It does not remain confined to a painful event. Over time, collective trauma becomes a way of organizing reality. And I don't need to go back through history of all the traumas this society has been enmeshed within and have never gotten support or help for, really. I don't want to do that, because then it's become something else. But what I will say is when trauma becomes collective, it leaves behind patterns that feel normal because they are inherited, repeated, and built into the environment. People adapt to those patterns so thoroughly, they stop recognizing them as adaptations. So again, back to the power of release. We are not recognizing these patterns as adaptations and believing that it just is the way it is, right? First step in scarcity, pain, and fear matrix is to see what's happening, to then begin to see the patterns that need to be released. Especially those patterns that we've adapted to, that become normalized, where we can't see. That's not only in individuals' lives, that's in other ways in which lives are taken up, manifested, and sustained. So these patterns confuse folks with common sense, maturity, efficiency, patriotism, professionalism, or order. This is how we maintain order. These institutions help maintain order. In that way, what began as a response to a threat gradually becomes part of the world people live in every day. This is what I mean by architecture. It is not simply an emotional residue. It is a design logic. Okay, let me turn this music down a little bit. Maybe I should turn it off. So, to understand this more clearly, we must begin with the body, okay? When the nervous system experiences danger, it shifts priorities. Curiosity narrows, imagination contracts, right? Vigilance begins to emerge, and trust, well, that is really unstable. It becomes more difficult to trust. And anything that's complex feels like it's threatening, right? And anything uncertain becomes a risk or is interpreted as a risk. These reactions make sense in a true emergency, right? They help people move through danger, away from danger. The problem begins when emergency physiology does not resolve. Then the body keeps organizing perception as though threat is still an essential fact of existence. And I talk about this a lot on my channel. At the level of an individual, that might look like chronic tension, scanning, vigilance, being too controlling, your emotions are numb, right? Or have difficulty accepting care. At the level of family, it can appear silence, rigidity, violence or volatility, secrecy, and role fixation. And boy, don't I know those things intimately regarding family. And at the level of culture, those same patterns become harder to detect. They are distributed across institutions. A society can normalize over surveillance, punitive logic, hoarding, exclusion, hyperproductivity, and fear-based decision-making without naming any of its trauma. It just calls it perhaps realism. And this is where the idea of semantic grooves becomes important, okay? A groove is a repeated pathway, that repetitive pattern cycle, right? That the power of release seeks to release people from, and particularly those that are not serving them. So in the body, repeated stress responses create familiar routes of activation. The system learns where to go under pressure, right? It learns how to brace, when to shut down, when to attack, when to appease, when to submit, and when to detach. Over time, those pathways become quite efficient outside of us and in our internal lives. They stop feeling like responses, and as I talk about a lot, start feeling like identity. Same thing happens collectively. Historical and cultural wounds create semantic grooves inside modern architecture. We think things have gone away. Those are old days. We're challenging that assumption right here and now. Let me make that concrete. A society shaped by conquest, displacement, racial domination, economic extraction, war, chronic insecurity, and institutional betrayal does not leave those experiences behind simply because time has passed. Example, when I'm working in higher ed at these large research universities, they had something called DEI, and they had it for everybody to help understand how everybody can get along. But people didn't want that. They liked the way because it was familiar. They didn't want to learn. They didn't think they had to. And so while there's one arm wanting to push through this and really discern how we can communicate better and work together better and work toward a socially just society, there's still the stuff inside individuals. And thus, they don't want to move forward because they're quite comfortable where they're at. So those experiences are still with them, just like a society shaped by conquest, displacement, racial domination, blah, 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 does not leave those experiences behind simply because time has passed. What efforts of work have been done as a collective to address all those traumas? No, it becomes a personal issue, right? The formal event, the occurrence may be over, but its organizing logic often remains. People build schools around control, rather than curiosity, right? Workplaces are built to exhaust people rather than, I don't know, celebrate wisdom and activate it, right? We got health systems that are more focused on the crisis than it is prevention. And then we have something called political cultures, which we are becoming very familiar with, that reward threat performance more than mature leadership. That is right here, right now. None of this is accidental. I want you to know that. It reflects nervous systems that have learned to function through adaptation to injury. And this is one reason infrastructure cannot be understood only as roads, grids, buildings, technologies, and bureaucratic systems. Infrastructure is also biological. Did you know that? It includes pattern ways human beings move stress through society. It includes the emotional assumptions embedded in policy. It includes the pacing of institutions, how they work, move, and then how care is distributed. And then what kind of punishment rituals do we have? And then the degree to which people are expected to suppress themselves just to belong. When shared dysregulation becomes widespread, okay, it produces a biological infrastructure that quietly shapes what the system can imagine, permit, or sustain. And that helps explain why institutional change so often fails. As I have seen in my lifetime and others. And we all need to see that. But there's people who don't see that. As a matter of fact, want to take it back to another time and place in the past. You know? And then what's working, you don't break it, even though it's really not working. People usually assume failure occurs in institutions because the wrong policy was chosen. Or it could be the wrong leader, or it could be the communication where a message was not the right way to message. And sometimes that is true. Often something deeper is happening, right? The human software inside the institution is still running in an old protective loop. The structure may change on paper, but the people tasked with carrying it forward are still organized around defense, scarcity, hierarchy, image management, and short-term control. In that state, change becomes cosmetic because the body beneath the system does not yet trust another way of being. And isn't that all so true in a particular house that is functioning right now as the axis around our society, around which our society is moving? I hope you can pick that up. And so, And one of the greatest misconceptions of our time is that we assume information produces transformation. Look, social media, access to all this stuff, different types of information. Yeah, we're moving forward. We're transforming. Maybe our information landscape is transforming. You know, we imagine that once people know better, that institutions will evolve, become better, you know, as a result. Yet knowledge is constantly filtered through nervous system state. A dysregulated system will interpret even wise reform through the lens of threat. Affirmative action. Dismantled. Because it was a threat to white men getting into colleges. Look. And a dysregulated system will experience collaboration as a loss of control. Who's one person right now who does not like to collaborate? It will experience accountability as humiliation. Who is in this war machine who throws reporters out for just that, asking questions that hold someone accountable? Humiliating. Don't take no pictures of me because the ones you took, that's not me. A humiliation tied with ego. A dysregulated system will experience shared power as instability. What arm of our politics is, I don't know, checked out? It will experience repair as weakness. Who just came up with the story that a particular country is eager for a deal, as opposed to, I made a mistake, let me fix this. That is why human beings can verbally endorse progress while behaviorally reproducing the very conditions they claim to oppose. When the protective loop is non-evolutionary, it does not mean that people aren't capable of change, okay? It means their operating system is organized around staying intact, right? Rather than becoming more integrated. Evolution requires enough safety for contact, reflection, flexibility, mutuality. It rewards the familiar, protective looping interrupts that process. It keeps energy cycling through defense. It rewards the familiar. Let's go back. Take women's rights away. Healthcare. Right? So, protective looping interrupts that progress. It keeps energy cycling through defense. It rewards the familiar. It narrows time horizons. Everything's right now. Right now, right now, right now. It makes survival feel more urgent than development. There's no money for science, cancer research, CDC to do rabies analyses. Under those conditions, institutions do not become places of maturation. They become holding environments for unresolved fear. That brings me to the current global climate, which I've already been putting it in there. I can't even talk. That I've already been putting in there throughout this talk, right? So many people are interpreting present tensions as if they're simply ideological shifts. So what's up with that? They see polarization, authoritarian impulses, heightened aggression, social fragmentation, cultural hostility, public distrust, and escalating conflict, and they assume these developments can be explained only by opinion, who that person is, identity, or political alignment. Those things matter, but they are not the whole picture here. A great deal of what we are witnessing can be also read as mass nervous system overload. When large populations live under chronic pressure, unresolved grief, financial precarity, ecological anxiety, rapid technological change, information overload, social isolation, and repeated institutional disappointment, the collective threshold for regulation drops. People become easier to inflame and harder to settle. Thought becomes more rigid. Projection, what we project, increases. We see ourselves, or the things we don't like about ourselves and others, and in systems. Ambiguity becomes intolerable. And nuance starts to feel like betrayal. In that state, ideology often becomes a vessel for physiology. People call it conviction, but underneath the conviction, there may be exhaustion, terror, humiliation, or the desperate search for relief. That does not mean beliefs are meaningless in this picture, because we all have them. The society has them. It means belief can be confused with unprocessed activation. And once that happens, the social field becomes much, much more combustible. Public discourse loses its depth because the nervous system is not oriented toward inquiry, period. Right? It is oriented toward protection. Groups then begin to mirror one another in ways they do not recognize. They accuse each other of threat while reproducing the same defensive dynamics in different languages or a different language. The content may differ, but the underlying physiology can be strikingly similar. And this is one reason sustainable unity remains so difficult. Unity, and that's social unity, collective unity, cannot be built on top of mass dysregulation and maintained by force of will. It doesn't work like that. It can't be achieved through branding, business branding, type of message, or having some sort of symbol. It requires the capacity to remain in contact with others without immediate collapse into fear, contempt, domination, or withdrawal. That is a biological demand. As much as this calls up things of what people would say morality, and that's not my word, but people would say this is a moral issue. A society full of overloaded nervous systems will struggle to produce trustworthy structures because the people animating those structures are themselves caught in unresolved loops. If that sounds bad or sobering, it is. I do not say it to produce a sense of defeat. I say it because clarity is essential. And I talked about that in my last live stream about, what strategies we can use to deal with a collapsing system, and clarity is key. We cannot dismantle what we refuse to name. And that's the first step in the power of release. What is it? Name it. Okay? If collective trauma has become architectural, then healing must also be architectural. It cannot remain solely a private practice for individuals trying to stay afloat while the larger systems continue reproducing injury. Personal healing matters. It does. But if it never touches culture, policy, leadership, education, labor, medicine, and public life, then the broader groove definitely will remain situated. It'll stay in place. So what does dismantling rigid structures require? First, it requires a different diagnosis, okay? We must stop reading every institutional breakdown as merely technical or every social conflict as merely ideological. In many cases, we are looking at systems carrying unresolved historical charge. We are looking at populations trying to function under cumulative strain without enough repair, truth, or grief, and even restoration. Until that is acknowledged in some way, some real way, the solutions will stay shallow, period. Second, it requires building environments that reduce protective looping rather than intensify it. And what does that mean? That means designing for trustworthiness, transparency, pacing, accountability, and humane expectation. We have to examine where our systems rely on fear to produce compliance. Further, we have to question what norms are actually signs of maturity and which are simply polished forms of dysregulation. Clarity. A workplace that rewards chronic overextension is not advanced. A political culture that thrives on perpetual alarm is not healthy. A school that teaches children to disconnect from their bodies in order to perform is not preparing them for collective evolution. Third, it requires recovering the role of grief. And in the Power Release program, grief is part of the release phase. You have to adequately grieve the end of something. Traumatized systems do not only carry fear, they carry loss. That has never been metabolized. When grief is blocked, it often reappears as rage, numbness, domination, compulsive speed, and emotional hardening. Right? A culture that cannot grieve cannot evolve. And some cultures have not grieved some of the horrors and traumas and things that have happened over time. So, and that's because he's forcing pain to re-enter the conversation through distortion, right? That is true of families. It is true of institutions. It is true of nations. Grief is not a detour from transformation. It is one of the conditions that make transformation possible, right? Fourth, it requires more serious understanding of embodiment, right? Embodiment is not a trend. It is the recognition that human beings do not interpret reality from the neck up. Bodies carry history in the DNA and otherwise. You ever heard of epigenetics? Indeed. Bodies register power. As I said, we're all energy, right? Bodies remember exclusion because it's automatic. We will automatically exclude ourselves from certain things. It remembers deprivation. Oh yeah. My mom was dirt poor when she was growing up. And even though when I was growing up we had a little money, she overstocked food like insane. Danger and unpredictability. Bodies can also register care, truth, rhythm, and integrity. That's why we keep going back to this place or that person. If we want different outcomes, then nervous system reality must become part of how we think about leadership, social change, conflict, governance, and repair. And finally, it requires a new relation to evolution itself. Collective evolution is not the same as collective acceleration. Faster is not always wiser. More connected technology or more aware technology does not mean more integrated relations, right? Evolution asks for greater capacity. And those who believe in this ascension understand that evolution in that psychic spiritual component is opening up space for that greater capacity. And it's not just greater reach though, right? We're not being opened up to reach further with something. It asks whether we can hold complexity without losing contact with one another. Can we stay solid and bidirectional, tridirectional, every direction, right? Can we deal with complexity? You know, complexity is hard. And it makes people move away from each other because they don't want to deal. And that's important. We have to hold complexity. It asks whether institutions can support development rather than endless adaptation. Because that's all we do is adapt. It asks whether the structures around us reflect fear management or deeper human maturation. And when I say it is time to dismantle rigid structures and reclaim our collective evolution, I'm not talking about destruction for its own sake. I'm not even really talking about destruction in the way you may be sensing it right now. I'm talking about interrupting inherited grooves, those repetitive patterns that we have collectively cycled and recycled over time that no longer serve life here, now. I'm talking about loosening the hold of designs built from chronic defense and recognizing that the body's flight or fight response is not only personal in this era. It's not just personal, but everything becomes a personal issue because it's tied to the understanding of, liberty, life, and happiness of the individual, rugged individualism and all that kind of stuff. Everything becomes personal. So when we're talking about and reclaim our collective evolution, loosening the hold of designs, recognizing the flight or fight response is not personal. That all this stuff is socially mirrored, culturally amplified, and structurally embedded. Okay? And a lot of this really speaks to my research when I was in academia. I'm not going into all of it, but that was what I looked at. I looked at, the way in which social systems create meaning for others, but also how we, as people within the proximity or part of that system with these structures, how we perpetuate their development or what they do, right? How our sense making and understanding. And of course, my research broke people up into segments, different populations, things like that. So I got very targeted into how different groups of people were working in this way, and then how systems communicated messages back to sustain power, privilege, and things like that. But this is really speaking to this in a much more metaphysical and physiological way. If we are honest, many of the systems we are trying to preserve, they were never neutral. They were built through layers of adaptation to injury, domination, instability, and even fear, right? Everything's in that scarcity pain matrix that I talk about on this channel. Some of them may need reform. Some need to definitely be reimagined, period, point blank. And then there's others that just need to end, period. And what matters is that we become capable of telling the difference. That discernment will not come from panic. My concern, instead of from panic, it comes from greater regulation within ourselves. And as these institutions have taken up that dysregulation, these things begin to have a better sense of regulation, deeper truth, historical clarity, and a willingness to confront the biological underpinnings of public life. I mean, like I talked about before, we go to a psychologist And they always point the finger to the person that something's wrong with them. And then they have these things to deal with the person, but they never really get to the role that our social and public life, our society plays in the development of these challenges, mental health challenges. It is beyond me. And at that point, look, I'm going to get ready to close because, I could talk a long time. The architecture of collective trauma is not invisible once you know how to look. You can see it in the speed of our institutions, how bad public discourse has become, how efficiency sort of hides punishment, and people believing that exhaustion is normal, and in the difficulties societies have with sustained repair. We were going one way, and now we're going back. None of this means our future is sealed, of course. That's the power of release. Recognize, release, and then reframe, which is also reimagine, right? What this means is our work is more demanding than many people have admitted. We got work to do. And I'm not sure who's ready for that in this way, but we have work to do. So the invitation is not simply to survive the overload. As I've talked about, everybody's holding on and surviving, and and why do people hold more than others, right? It's not to survive the overload. It's to understand it well enough that we stop building our future from a logic of old injuries. That is a threshold before us, my people. Not a return to normal, but the difficult, intelligent work of becoming more human than the system's trauma taught us to create. That was a lot, right? But that was how I'm sensing and feeling, and that download that came into me. And, look, what was created this? And if we don't want this to hamper our evolution and collective unity, then we need to do something about it. And I hate even to use the word democracy, because we never were democracy. Hello? For those of y'all who didn't know, a flawed democracy. You can't have a flawed democracy. You're either a democracy or not. But the idea of collective unity makes much more sense to me. Wrapped around things that move us beyond repetitive historical tracks and grooves and cycles. Beyond getting to a place and then everything being dismantled. And people always they ask, what's happening? I don't understand. I wish we were. No, we have to get clear about what is happening right here and now. There's no wishing. There is no going back. We are here in the situation right here and now. Let's name it. Let's call it out. Let's speak the truth of this pattern. That requires reflection. I could go into all this. My research was all about race and isms and this and that. Women. The technology used to control them. Now it's policy. No abortions. People dying. Backwards. Are we an enlightened society or what? I mean, those of us who are existing in some intuitive, psychic, metaphysical resonance. I don't don't ascribe to any of this. However, I understand it is so important for folks who are embedded in all of this and who do ascribe to it. And especially those that want to make change, to understand what is broken from different perspectives. Because as an educator, some people will get something one way of one message, another person will get it in a different message. And for some reason, the guides have me wanting to talk about the scarcity pain matrix on a societal level, as well as an individual one. You know, and one of the best ways to soften up the holding is to have discussions about what is happening, not in a way that's for the news or some other packaged performance way. Let's talk about our fear. To talk about what is happening with other people and shared understanding, collective meaning making. There need to be work groups set up right now to think about what needs to end, what needs reform, and what needs to be reimagined in this society. Not some scattered thing or not some political thing. If this is a country by, for, and of the people, then it is us who need to stand firmly on our role in ensuring that we move forward in that evolutionary way, but most definitely toward collective unity. Because uncollective unity is what has us here and now. If we have the power, all we do is elect people. We see that that's bull stuff. Can't trust it no more. So, if this society is by, of, and for the people, then what ways can we as a collective be integrated in the change that needs to take place so that we never experience this again? Yeah, I get a little serious, to say the least, because it's very important. If something hit home to you, please comment. If you're watching this, like and subscribe. It just helps with the algorithm, you know, just to get the message out there, because lots of people need to hear this, especially in this time with all this stuff happening, you know. And if anybody has a comment on something they want me to talk further on, then let me know. Shoot me a comment or send me an email to let me know what areas I need to discuss next. Because my whole mission in talking about this component of the scarcity pain matrix is the application of the Power of Release program. We got to recognize the patterns and cycles and the emotional burden that's attached to those things. And then we need to release, understand those emotions, release that thing that needs to go and grieve it going, because it serves some role. And then to reframe our society, how we do things in ways that are positive, supportive, collective. Yeah. It's important. We can no longer just elect people and sit on the sidelines and believe that we read about them, they're going to do. I mean, that whole trust system is broken. The citizens need to be actively engaged in policy making in this society. And I have ideas about how that could look. My mind, I'm getting more downloads as I'm sitting here even thinking about this stuff. Look, please comment, like, and subscribe. Again, I could talk forever about this area. If there's something you'd like to hear, please drop me a note, an email, and I can talk about it. I think some of the videos, I'm going to start talking about my own spiritual awakening. And I'm going to talk about that because when people talk about spiritual awakening, it's like they unplug from what's happening on the ground because we want to vibrate high. We can vibrate high and still be grounded in what is happening around us. And that's why I want to share my spiritual awakening, to show people that side of it. And the idea that with this new enlightened understanding, that we then speak ways to effectively do the work, right? Look, please like, comment, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you, beautiful souls, for your time today. It always makes me happy to be here. And, again, let me know if this messaging resonates with you, if you want some more on this, because I'm being called to speak on this area. Because we truly have to recognize the repetitive cycles here to begin to move into release and to reimagine and reframe at a societal level, at a collective level. And that's actually what the collective consciousness is downloading into me. There's a profound energy for serious change. Unfortunately, people have been so disenfranchised from what that means because we'll let somebody take care of it. We'll elect them. It's time to stop thinking about, even if stop focusing so much on somebody facilitating your life and maintaining it and whatever. It's time to get involved. Yes, protests are important. But when it comes time to evolve through reimagining, we need to be actively engaged. I don't know how many times I'm saying that, but that's the message, the culminating message here. Oh, and you know what? I always forget to do this. Let me show my little thing here. Oh, so look. Anybody who's interested, I still have room for a few more in the 5-day micro challenge, which is providing insight on the Power of Release program, the recognize, release, and reframe. And in that process, we're really going to talk a lot about intuition and psychic development. Not that I want people to be psychics, that's not it. But we do have psyche, senses, intuition. And so that's important to reflecting and sitting in the Power of Release process. Okay? QR code, sign up. It's complimentary. All right? And it is on school. So it's an online community. I'll be uploading videos, live streams, a lot of teaching material, but just with people as they experience this 5-day journey. That the goal is, hopefully, they can utilize this framework of recognize, release, and reframe in other areas of their life. Or they can move through the Power of Release program once they understand more about what it is, right? So there's a QR code. And I also got to show this. The Power of Release book is now on Kindle. It's $5.99. The ebook has less than the paperback book, but it definitely gives you an understanding of how I was able to stop being a closed fist and open my hand. right? The journey I went through, this is all sort of the foundation for the Power of Release program. QR code, pick it up. The paperback, I think, is $9.99. Again, that has a little bit more than the actual Kindle. All right. So I'm going to stop it there. All right. Again, I want you all to have a phenomenally fantastic day. Enjoy it not as hump day, but as another gift. Especially if you're breathing in this corporal body. It's a gift. Use yourself wisely today. Okay? Thank you all. And, I look forward to coming back. All right?